Thank you for joining us today for striking the balance between risk and response in prescreen and lead buying. Online lenders today face fierce competition because marketing response rates are on the decline as consumers are flooded with offers. When it comes to acquiring new accounts, the challenge is to foster growth while mitigating the risks of fraud and default. Get ready for a lively discussion about ways you can leverage data analytics to find the sweet spot between risk and response. Our speaker from LexisNexis Risk Solutions is Zach Tondre, Director of Strategy for Digital Economy. Zach has 14 years of banking experience and the expertise to solve problems around fraud, identity, credit risk, and compliance within the digital economy. Before we begin, here are a few housekeeping details. This webcast uses your computer's audio, so please be sure that you have your audio levels adjusted. If you have any technical issues during the webcast, our support team is available to assist you. Just type your question into the Q&A window on your dashboard. Please submit questions for our speaker through the Q&A window as well. Zach and his team will do their best to answer them at the end of the webinar. And if we run out of time, they'll follow up with you via email. And now over to you, Zach.
Great. Thanks so much, Mary, and thank you, everyone, for joining today. It's really my pleasure to be with you. I hope that today's webinar can be informative and can answer some questions you have around this really relevant topic right now. So to start off, I just really want to talk a little bit about what LexisNexis does so I can kind of contextualize why we have the expertise to talk about the things that we're going to be talking about, and for those of you who don't know what we do, just to frame it up that way. And so really when we look at our core value proposition of what we do, there's four main components that help us create end-to-end solutions that allow our customers to assess risk and then opportunity for new customer acquisition across multiple different industries. And really it all starts off with our vast data resources. And so we maintain about 2 petabytes of content that are comprised of billions of public and proprietary records that come from tens of thousands of different sources that we aggregate. And then we use a big data technology that we call HPCC to help us kind of manage all of this data and make sure that we can ingest it into attributes and models and deliver it out in a variety of different products at very high speeds. When we think about all this data and all these different sources that it's coming from, really where we have our core value proposition around that is the linking and analytics that go into making sure that all of these disparate sources that are coming into the HPC system are able to be linked and resolved to a single consumer. And so when we talk about big data, for us it's more about deep data, being able to align really large sets of data that are there for multiple different use cases under a single consumer. And finally, kind of where the rubber meets the road is the industry-specific expertise. We have strategists and salespeople across the organization that focus on specific solutions for specific industries. And like Mary had mentioned, I run strategy around digital economy, which online lending falls into today, which I think is the primary focus of this conversation. And so in the end, all of these four core assets kind of roll into very customer-centric solutions, and a lot of times customized solutions to solve problems for our customers. So that being said, let's go ahead and just jump into the topic at hand. Like Mary had mentioned, we know that online lenders today are facing fierce competition out there, and that marketing response rates tend to be on the decline as consumers are flooded with offers. And we know these offers are coming through all the different channels that are available, whether that be digital channels on mobile, web, mail, whatever it might be. They're getting them from all different directions, and every consumer is getting these offers. And then, the flip side of this problem is that last year, we saw fraud costs with traditional lenders equate to about 1.96% of total revenue. That sounds super high. Well, when we look at digital lenders, we add, additional margin onto that. Now we're talking at, on average, 3.22% of large digital lenders' revenue is going towards fraud. Pretty staggering numbers. And right now, when we're looking at onboarding and fraud, some of you may be seeing a bit of a disconnect, and we're going to kind of explore that and talk about how the two can exist together and what this can look like in the perfect situation. And that number, when we look at that 1.96 versus 3.22, it's really not surprising to me to find that, as we see that online lending tends to focus more towards thin credit file consumers. And then on top of that, we tend to want to onboard these consumers in the lowest friction way possible. And so both of these together are really just opening up us to fraud. And so with that, I'm just going to turn it over to Mary for a quick poll question.
That sounds great. So this is once again a question for our audience. How much did each $1 of fraud cost the average digital lender last year? So what do you think? Is this something where you're trying to make us do math here? Josh, the choices here are 0.37 or 37 cents, $1.37, $2.37, $3.37, or $4.37. How much did each $1 of fraud cost the average digital lender last year? And you're just restricting this to digital lenders, right? Right, Josh?
Yep, Zach, and it's actually coming right out of our true cost.
Zach, sorry.
No worries. It's coming right out of our true cost of fraud study that we do each year. This one was based on financial institutions and broke this out just for digital lenders as well. And so it's kind of the fraud multiplier effect is what we call this in our research. And we look at the total costs involved in every dollar of fraud across all the efforts that an organization has to take in response to that fraud.
All right, great. Just a couple more minutes while everybody tries to weigh in on this. How much did each $1 of fraud cost the average digital lender last year? So anywhere between 37 cents and $4.37. And we'll go ahead now and take a look at what our audience is thinking. How much did each $1 of fraud cost the average digital lender last year? And here are the results. Wow, kind of even across the board. Most people think 337, but did you want to tell us what the answer is?
The answer is 337, and so great job, everyone. Maybe a handful of you have read the True Cost of Fraud study. So kind of using that as a springboard. Obviously, when we look at onboarding around pre-screen and also buying leads, fraud is a major contributor kind of downstream of this ROI. And so we're going to continue to talk more about how we kind of strike the balance of this risk. And so we know that with these declining response rates and this rising fraud, it's becoming more and more difficult to grow responsibly. On one side, we're pressured to grow market share, and through response rates and getting response rates boosted through new data and new insights. Ideally, these new insights and data will lower your customer acquisition costs and then also raise that customer lifetime value. This new value will hopefully help you overcome the cost of switching to these new data sources. And we all know that there's cost involved in that. And then, that final consideration is getting that consumer over the finish line and being able to onboard them efficiently and effectively so that we are able to retain these consumers going forward, that experience is something that they want to do again and again the next time that they need your product or service. So on the flip side of this, we're talking about the reduction of risk, and specifically talking about the reduction of risk around lead generation. And when we look at this, we really think that at the time of new customer acquisition, that this is the most cost-effective place to reduce risk. In fact, we feel so strongly about it, we even recommend that there is a subgroup, that you create a subgroup of campaign metrics that are centered around both fraud attempts that were blocked before onboarding, so those identities that we suppressed during the suppression process that we're going to talk about here in the coming slides, as well as fraud that actually made it through the onboarding process that was executed either in the form of a first payment default or something like that could have come from a synthetic identity, manipulated identity, any other risk factor that came across with this identity. And then, we talked a little bit about some of the inherent risk around digital lending. And when we look at the channels that the consumers are being targeted through, we see to kind of even further complicate this balance, we typically see lower credit quality, so higher credit risk, coming through the digitally targeted channels. And I think we all know that precise targeting inside digital channels is still a major challenge, and that's probably why we see, some responders that maybe don't fit kind of our perfect target audience that we had in mind from the beginning. So, the good news around this risk versus response is that we tend to see that it rank orders very nicely. And so we can build models around predicting these kinds of outcomes, if we arm ourselves with the insights and the data to do so. And so if you look here at the two graphs I've got up on the screen with a fraud score on the left-hand side and a credit score on the right-hand side, and then on the vertical axis, you've got that response rate. And obviously, as we move from left to right, we move from higher risk consumers to lower risk consumers, but at the same time, we're taking that response rate and we're moving it down. And so it's all about finding the insights to be able to model around that best customer and then find the sweet spot somewhere in this continuum that we can rank order to be able to discover, where these campaigns need to focus. So if we kind of dig into that just a little bit, just to give an example of some data and how some of these specific data points are correlated when it comes to risk and response. A great example that we look at in our data set is the time since the consumer last moved. And so whether they're a renter or an owner, we look at multiple different address sources that are coming in. We use algorithms and models to be able to determine which one of those address sources are their best and most correct address. And we use that as a model-ready attribute to predict a lot of different things. And so when we look at this time since last move, over on the left-hand side, we start off at less than 2 months, and then we go all the way up to 23 years. And I think intuitively we all know that someone that moved more recently is going to be more likely to respond. They've got life needs. There's been changes that have happened. They need money. They need other stuff, right? However, they are also going to be the highest risk responders in our models. And so we have to find kind of a way to strike that balance. The same thing holds true when we talk about household estimated income. Households that have the least amount of income tend to be the most responsive. The households with the most income tend to be the least responsive. Where's that sweet spot? Do we want to create risk-appropriate offers for each of those segments, or possibly just exclude some of those segments entirely? We're going to talk a little bit more about that. And then just a final example, when I mentioned one of our core competencies around linking, one of the things that we can do really well is find people that are associated with those prospects. And so once we have a list of prospects in front of us, whether we generated that or it came from somewhere else, we're able to kind of see a lot of attributes around relatives and associates that are linked to these prospects, whether they've lived in the same house before or are related, have been on the same deed. There's a lot of things that can link consumers together. And in this example, we show the total count of relatives and associates who have a lien or judgment and kind of that correlation with risk. So obviously, when it comes to credit risk, the folks with more liens and judgments tend to be riskier bets, but they also tend to be more responsive. And so we have to strike a balance there as well. So really kind of just, summarizing the way that we've set up the problem, which we're about to start talking about the solution, the combination of, declining response and increasing fraud really multiplies risk. We know, and we've talked about the fact that risk and response are correlated, and that digital channel adds even an additional layer of risk. So we need to be building response models that are looking at fraud and device risk suppressions so that we're not targeting the riskiest consumers by just looking at the highest responders. And then remembering that ROI is negatively impacted by marketing to high-risk applicants that at the end of the day won't end up making it through that onboarding process, or even worse, synthetic and manipulated identities that do make it through the onboarding process that end up causing a loss downstream. And so with that, before we start talking about the solutions, I'm going to turn it over to Mary for one more poll question.
Thank you very much. And thanks to everybody who responded to our last poll. This one is also about you. Do you have systems in place that help identify fraud and or mitigate risk before the marketing dollars are spent. Your answers are pretty good there. Yes, no, and I'm not sure. I guess all of the above wouldn't be appropriate. So go ahead and just make your answer right there on the slide itself. Just click the slide, and you'll use either yes or no, or I'm not really sure. Yeah, because we're talking to marketers and probably other types of people on this webcast. There might be different ways to approach this question. But the question remains, do you have systems in place to help identify fraud and or mitigate risk before marketing dollars are spent? And we're just about there. And the good thing about this one, Zach, is that there is no right answer, right?
Right. I mean, yeah, we're just trying to see what's being done. I mean, we know we're all mitigating risk at some point during the process, and today we're just really talking about this happening at the top of the funnel.
Great. All right, we'll take a look now and see what our audience has to say. Do you have systems in place to help identify fraud and or mitigate risk before marketing dollars are spent? The majority are saying yes.
Great. Great, and I think that's great, and hopefully, we're continuing to add some new insights and new tactics around that strategy. And then, for those of you who answered no, hopefully there's a compelling argument to start looking at some ways to kind of, get some solutions to those problems into your workflow of new customer acquisition. Great. So we've talked a lot about the problems. We've talked a lot about kind of the nature of the data and how it really lends itself well to creating predictive models. And so let's just talk about three kind of simple, straightforward ways to mitigate risk in pre-screen offers, and with accomplishing that end goal of increasing ROI, and also making sure that customer experience that all of you see as one of your core assets and possibly your market differentiator, making sure that that's not disrupted. And so the first thing that we're going to talk about is just proactively identifying fraudulent or risky prospects before those marketing dollars are spent against them. Right? We're going to talk about using tools to ensure that the prospects you're marketing to will, pass your new account opening process, and that those that pass won't be likely to execute fraud. Again, talking about synthetics or manipulated identities that move into our portfolios. The second piece we're going to talk about is utilizing response, conversion, and loan performance data to build lookalike models. So now that we've suppressed some of the fraud, we want to make sure that these new prospects are going to turn into our next best customer. And then three, making sure that we get these consumers all the way to the finish line, integrating digital identity with physical identity to create a low-friction workflow that makes sure that we reduce abandonment. Because, of course, if we don't get them through that final stage, everything that came before that was for naught. All right, so moving on to our first point, proactively identifying fraudulent or risky applicants before marketing dollars are spent. Using some kind of lead integrity solution to identify and suppress potentially fraudulent leads from campaign lists, using the same kind of institutional risk factors that we look at in our fraud models at application or onboarding, making sure that we are able to suppress those identities that are very thin, synthetic, or manipulated, or maybe have other factors that are inherent to fraud risk. And then secondly, creating a custom model to proactively apply credit risk scores to your target universe. We know that this may be a multi-data source approach. There may be data from us and a variety of other vendors out there that go into these models with the goal of eliminating poor quality leads. Or if we don't want to necessarily eliminate those poor quality leads, maybe we create risk-appropriate messaging and offers for each of those individual segments that we've gained insight into through both fraud suppression and then scoring of that universe. And so real quickly, we'll go through just kind of a brief case study on how some of our customers have used this approach. And so this customer of ours wanted to create better financial inclusion by saying yes to nearly everyone by giving a risk-appropriate offer. So not everyone gets the same offer, but everyone gets an offer. And so this customer partnered with us to create a custom solution that regularly monitors a large prospect portfolio. And so with that prospect portfolio, we pre-score the entire universe to identify risk associated with each potential customer. And again, this is after those fraud suppressions have happened. And so we know that all of the customers that we're scoring inside this universe are already lower on the fraud side of the scale. And so this customer created a unique risk-appropriate offer for each one of these tiers that we identified. And these offers were just sitting ready in queue. And so as we as we execute this file every month, these personalized marketing campaigns, whether that be through website content, sales messaging, wherever the channel may be coming from, that this unique offer gets presented in front of the right customer that was already set in that tier. And really what we've seen downstream, this has been going on for a couple of years with this customer, we're seeing really positive brand impact. Their customers are talking to their friends about the fact that they got a yes and an offer versus a no. We're also seeing increased close rates. We're seeing decreased abandonment rates because we're getting the right customers in the door. And of course, because of the scoring up front, decreased credit risk, which makes perfect sense. So with that case study wrapping up, we're going to send it over to one more poll question. Mary?
Thank you very much. All right. So have you utilized lookalike models in your marketing to acquire customers that are similar to your best customers? And just as you've done before, click your answer right there on the slide itself, yes, no, or I'm not sure. And we'll take a look at whether or not people are answering this one and what they're finding in just a second with our results. By the way, someone asked whether or not we have an opportunity to look at the webcast after it's all done and recorded, and the answer to that question is yes. We will be able to send you a copy or a link to the webcast we did, and you'll be able to share it with your friends or just watch again. So once again, have you utilized lookalike models in your marketing to acquire customers that are similar to your best customers? And just about everybody has weighed in here with either yes, no, or I'm not sure. So we'll go ahead and take a look at, see how the audience weighed in.
Okay, great.
And it looks like we're up here with the answer, and almost 56% are saying yes, they have.
Yep, and I think that's what I would have expected. Looking at using response models. A lot of times, for those of you who answered no, a lot of times when we see new customers come in that we engage with response models, a lot of times some of the marketing that they're doing, while it may be kind of judgmentally driven, meaning that we're just kind of deciding different attributes or different pieces of demographic data to select or not select where prospects go to, going back to that very first example, a lot of times we find that our assumptions about our best customer can be wrong, and that additional data insights can help us see more about that customer. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that. And so, we've addressed risk, and now we're layering on, once those risky prospects are out of the pool, we're layering on this responsiveness. And so, of course, you know who your best customer is. You decide what the parameters are of who has the highest lifetime value, who your best customer is, and who you want more of. And then once that's defined, we gather a population of those best customers to model with. The first thing that we do is we append highly predictive attributes onto those customer records to gain more understanding about who they are and why they behave the way that they do. We look at multiple different filters around that. We look at things like velocity of identity elements, characteristics of that identity, behavioral data, all sorts of different things that are appended onto that prospect to allow us to get more insights. And then, like we had mentioned before, we start to reveal kind of what that sphere of influence of that customer looks like. And so when we talk about relatives and associates and then friends and family, these key influencers, we know that surveys say that 79% of consumers say that their friends or family had a heavy influence on a buying decision. So it's really important that when we're talking about campaigns that we're not only targeting that prospect, but that we also have some messaging that are going out to the people who may be the key influencers in their lives. And then down below that, 72% of consumers have made a purchase due to a referral or recommendation from a friend or family member. Okay, so now we've got the additional data, we've got the associations with these consumers, and so we talk about expanding insights. And so building predictive models that can target your best consumer, the customer with the highest lifetime value, and just explore what that would look like. So a case study here, looking at kind of revealing this best customer. This is from a different industry than who we're talking with today, but I think it's really interesting because it's just an example of what this industry thought, or what this company thought their best customer was, and then what we ended up finding in the data, and kind of how that went full circle. And so when we looked at this customer's sample file, they provided a list of all of their best customers, or who they would define as their customer with the highest lifetime value. And some of kind of the markers in this file, there was mostly women that were age 55 and higher, mostly living in property values of less than $100,000, and this was regardless of whether they rent or own, that was the value of the property that they were residing in primarily. Nearly half of them had unverified devices, meaning that these devices probably were on contracts. The highest 20% of them, meaning the highest 20% of the most valuable customers, had 2 or more liens or judgments on file, and they also had a low likelihood of any kind of business association, so not a lot of self-employed people. And so from these attributes, it might not come as a big surprise that this customer was a discount wireless provider. And so the interesting piece about this is, when we initially had this conversation with this customer, they said, hey, well, so who we're trying to target is, younger, high-tech, early adopter millennials. That's our target market. And what we're seeing in the data is, wow, well, but you gave us a definition of your highest, of your highest lifetime value customer, and they're 55 or older women, who live in lower value properties, and there was kind of the silence on the phone, like, well, that can't be right. I mean, that isn't who we've been targeting. And so it's like, okay, well, let's go back and look at the data a little bit more. And so they went back, and after some digging and analysis, they found that what had happened is they had over-indexed for these customers as a result of a particular ad placement. They had been advertising on late-night TV during a segment where this was the target demographic. And so their advertising had worked. They just didn't realize that they had over-indexed in that area. And so the story has a happy ending. At least the customer has better insights into who they're attracting via different channels. But really the moral of the story is that, judgmentally looking at who we think is going to be responsive to offers, a lot of times we can be wrong, and we need to look at the data behind that. Okay, and so the third point is, the point that we mentioned around the finish line. We've talked about reducing fraud and credit risk upfront. We've talked about making sure that we're targeting customers that look like our best customers. Now we need to make sure that we get them across the finish line using the appropriate mix of device-based risk assessment and the assessment of physical identity, which is what we call like the real-world footprint of the consumer, the public record data footprint. In places like application or pre-qual, over on the left-hand side, through account creation and login, we're typically using risk indicators tied to device and to kind of determine what the workflow is going to look like. And so high-risk device indicators may end up requiring kind of step-up authentication. On the flip side of that, low-risk device indicators or a known device tied to a known individual may require less authentication and a lower friction journey for the customer. And of course, we all know that it's not all about no friction or low friction. It's about appropriate friction for the risk that we feel like we're taking in onboarding. In places like application, pre-qual, and account creation, that kind of plays across both digital and physical identity. Once they're onboarded, we really can rely on device-based risk to allow them to perform other tasks like paying, changing credentials, things like that. And then looking at cross-selling, when we've been talking about all of this information of kind of this real-world footprint around public record data, being able to continually monitor this data inside a prospect database so that we can see some of those key triggers for the purpose of cross-selling also becomes very important. So just an example of kind of what this workflow could look like. the digital identity side of things is passively collected. These are things that come off of devices through either an app or on the website. And so as we're able to collect these digital indicators, this can cause us to provide or to collect less information from the consumer when it comes to PII, possibly get an upload or scan of an ID, and then be able to pre-fill applications. And so again, we're focusing on taking these prospects that we have curated through fraud suppression and now through lookalike modeling, and making sure that they're going to have a good experience in the onboarding as well. This application gets pre-filled, the consumer validates the information, gets their offer, and then moves on to funding or whatever the final product is. And really, when we look at some of the benefits, because I think that a lot of times when we talk about fraud mitigation inside customer onboarding, it's kind of an either or. Either we have a great customer experience, or we mitigate more fraud. There's always this balance. But what we really show is that we actually can use digital identity data to suppress more fraud and enhance the customer experience all at the same time. And so when you look at this slide, we're looking at the average % of monthly manual reviews and successful fraud volume. This again is from our true cost of fraud study, which is available out on our website. Tons of information focused on a few different verticals. This one here, we can look at the basic approach to identity verification, the multi-layered, and then the multi-layered with digital identity. And when we look at the basic, we're talking about just the verification of the PII elements, kind of the traditional way. What we see is that, if we're using traditional ID data to make these verifications, in this study, about 45% of these identities ended up in a manual review queue. Not a great experience, right? The consumer doesn't get to go from start to finish all in one step. They end up getting stuck somewhere in between, and now there's a waiting period. And with that 45%, we saw that about 1,000 accounts had actually passed through the process and ended up being fraudulent. So then we look at the multi-layered approach, and so now we're adding on things like device ID fingerprinting, authentication by biometrics, phone verification, possibly challenge quizzes. So with this multi-layered approach that is risk appropriate, right? We're only layering these things on if the risk of the prior step is requiring it. So now we've taken that from 45% in the manual review queue down to 34%, and we've taken the number of accounts down from 1,054 to 692. So the story gets even better when we add digital identity. So the authentication all looks the same, but now we're passively collecting this digital identity data from the device at the very beginning. Now our manual review queue drops another margin down to 29%, which is a little bit of an improvement over the 34, but the number of fraudulent accounts that actually make it through now new account opening dropped by over half. So really positive story, compelling. It departs a little bit from the topic of the webinar around acquiring leads. However, we've got to get them across the finish line, and this customer experience is obviously a big part of making sure that we don't have customers abandoning. So wrapping this all up, I just want to go through a case study real quick that is specific to digital lending, and then we'll move on to a Q&A session. And so this large online lender was experiencing limited returns using their existing data. And so they were really looking for us to help them out with their ITA campaigns and wanted to know if Profile Booster could add better lift for them. Profile Booster is our marketing attribute product that we use to create non-FCRA response models inside campaigns. And we've got another product called Risk View Prescreen, which is the product that we could do the same thing with, but to make firm credit offers on the FCRA side. So the goal here was to identify attributes which were reflective of both risk and response to improve overall profitability of these campaigns. And so we're not focusing just on risk or just response. Again, we're using these tactics to suppress these risky identities, making sure that we get the least risk and the highest response possible and find that sweet spot. So what we did here is we appended Profile Booster attributes onto a sample of 500,000 prospects from a recent campaign that they had already run. And so this was a retroactive activity to see kind of how things would perform. We developed a Profile Booster response model that could be used in these invitation to apply campaigns to target high-value prospects, which typically could have been overlooked if we hadn't built a lookalike model or hadn't built this response model. This lender, in this case, experienced a 15% improvement in response rate and a 20% improvement in cost savings, resulted in a greater than expected ROI. And so by suppressing some of these mailings that would have gone out, we were able to reduce costs and boost that response rate and use that profile booster model that was trained against some of these more fraudulent identities so that we could avoid adverse selection and avoid the riskiest prospects. So diving into the numbers a little bit, you can see the total number of leads here up top, just under 600,000, and then the number of mailed leads, the number of responders, and the number of loans booked. And so this is kind of what their historic response rates looked like in their campaigns and what they were used to experiencing. And it was, pretty average, pretty on par to where they thought they should be. And so this is kind of a picture of what they looked like before. And then now we look at what we were able to do with the profile booster model. And so across the bottom here, you can see the number of responders and the number of mailers. You can see the response model that we built with the responsiveness rate on the vertical axis there. And as we go from the highest scoring consumers, as far as the profile booster score goes, all the way over to the lowest scoring consumers, you can see where we decided to make that cut. And by cutting off those lowest 5 tiers, not only were we able to realize that 15% cost savings, but we were able to boost our response rate by 15% because of the consumers that we targeted there. So overall, we cut out about 17,000 mailers that had those lower response rates, and man, the campaign looked a lot nicer after that. So with that, we'll move over to our last poll question and then also move into the Q&A session.
That sounds great. And once again, the poll question is just like you've done before. Answer right there on the slide. Are you interested in learning a little bit more? Well, when would be the best time for a sales representative to give you a contact phone call? And now we'll go ahead and move on to our Q&A session. All you have to do to participate is submit your questions through the Q&A window, and we'll go ahead and get to as many as we can in the time that we have left. So here's the first one. It's from Will. What are the typical response rates for the profile booster and or risk view for pre-screened products?
Yeah, and so I think that's a hard question to answer. The response rates vary widely depending on the populations that we're looking at. And so I think we have to get a little bit more focused on who the population is to see what the response rates are. However, one thing that I can say is that when we look at these, what we call alternative data-driven products, and so data around both credit decisioning and marketing and profiling that is not based on typical consumer reports. And so this is not coming, this data is not coming from trade lines. It's coming from this person's real world footprint. And so what that does is it expands our universe much beyond what we would call kind of the traditionally scorable universe. And so we do see additional prospects in that mix, but just because, there's additional prospects doesn't mean that you want all those prospects. And so I think it really comes down to creating models to maximize the response rate in the product offerings that you have. And of course, like I showed in that last example, going through and giving us performance data of how a past campaign went and us being able to append data, look at how we could have bolstered that response rate, that's really where we can kind of prove the value out in kind of a retroactive look so that we don't have to go out and try everything in market while there's still going to be a place to test some of this stuff out in market to prove out some of these response rates. If we have prior campaigns to look at, we can really prove what the lift would have been with the data and then go try it in market.
Thank you very much, Will, for your question. And now here's one from Mike. Do you offer the biometric solution or do you outsource it?
Yeah, and so we have multiple different biometric solutions that are built into our fraud and identity suites with ThreatMetrics. And so, we in-house between ThreatMetrics, which is our device identity side of LexisNexis risk solutions, as well as our other fraud solutions, can meet all those needs around biometric authentication, as well as other kind of like front-end fraud mitigation.
Thank you. How do we use your data to weed out fraudulent or risky prospects in our marketing campaigns? Do you have an API?
Yes, we do. And so, every data source and product that we talked about, we can use some of these suppression tactics, via API or through batch. And so just depending on the customer workflow, we use, they get the data in different ways. And so when we have these custom models, whether they be, whether it's returning a score or attributes around scoring the prospect for responsiveness or risk, these can be delivered by API or they can be delivered in batch. And when we deliver these through API, we can deliver them through a multitude of different workflows. Like when we talked about the digital identity and device identity side of things, we can have workflows that string together device risk assessments with other fraud scores and, continue to filter things for responsiveness and, kind of across the board.
All righty, thank you. Here's one from Chance. He says, how does this software avoid potentially running afoul of ECOA?
Yeah, and so, when we look at building models, we, are considering all of the model governance and compliance, in line with the customer's regulatory environment, and then obviously, our own guidelines around that. And so we are a credit reporting agency, and what I had mentioned, RiskView, that is our FCRA product that is fully compliant with the FCRA and all the other regulations. And so depending on the offer that we're making, the products are going to be fully compliant there. And then we also, test models to make sure that they don't create disparate impact. And we actually have lots and lots of information around that can be gathered. If you want to follow up with us, we've got reports around kind of the use of our data and financial inclusion and just kind of the general impacts of our data when we look at how we target populations. And it's a really positive story. So we can definitely follow up with you on that.
Thank you. Do you have any retro analysis or trending to provide us what our best customers look like utilizing your attributes? Or do we as an organization need to provide those parameters in order to build a lookalike model?
Yeah, and so typically I think, like I had mentioned, the typical best approach is, you have to define who your best customer is, what that looks like. I mean, we know you have a lot of information on your customer and how they behave in your environment, kind of your focused view on them. And so the idea is once you've defined who your best customer is, we don't know who your best customer is, but once you've defined who that best customer is, we can help you find more people that look like them and also filter out those people or identities that are just masquerading like them. Again, those manipulated and synthetic identities.
Well, you've given us a lot of great information. Can you give us maybe the answer to the question, what's the most important thing to take away from today's webcast?
I think it's really, the idea of making sure that we're doing everything that we can to mitigate fraud and other risk at the top of the funnel so we're not dealing with these problems downstream. I think that really summarizes it. If we can suppress those riskiest identities and make sure that we are marketing to people that have the best potential to turn into our next best customer, then everything downstream starts to look a lot better, right? Everything from onboarding successfully to charge-offs and fraud after they've been onboarded. It really comes up with a successful story, and it does require, some definite collaboration between marketing and risk in the organization. And bridging that gap, we think, really is kind of the secret to being able to see higher ROIs, better onboarding rates, less abandonment, and overall, growing your portfolio in a responsible way.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Zach, and thank you to our audience for participating in our polls, sending in your questions, and attending today's webinar. We hope that you found it valuable. Now, if we didn't get to your question, Zach or one of his team members will follow up directly so you can get your answer. It's about 45 minutes past the hour. We do want to respect your time. Just a reminder, the presentation and webinar recording will be distributed to all registrants. Thanks again, and enjoy the rest of your day.